Okay, so my name is Akriti. I'm a PhD scholar at IGNOU in the discipline of journalism and mass communication, and I'll be taking up the session for block two of Media and Society, that is Media and Development. Is my screen visible?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Okay. Okay, so block two is specifically dealing with media and development. Now, first, we'll be talking about the different theories that have come up with the context of development and development communication, how development communication came about, what and how can development communication be applied in the discipline of journalism and mass communication. So, first, when we talk about the concept and theories, development theories or development communication as a concept came about when World War II took place, after that specifically. And development, if we talk about what it is, it exactly, it is access to better education, healthcare, equality, freedom, and basically to tackle all kind of disparities, whether it's income or whether it's social disparities that one may face at all phases of life. Now, if you have any questions or if you think that you might want to add on something, please interrupt me and please work through with me whenever it's feasible for you. As I talked about, development as a concept transformed post World War II, and mass media, the specific infusion of mass media came about in the context of development communication, right? So the first paradigm of development that came about was after World War II, exactly right after World War II in 1945, 1946, which was a dominant paradigm of development. It is also known as the modernization theory. Now, dominant paradigm of development was evolved by Western countries, and it is still very much effective and valid in many parts of the country, especially in the West. It was aimed at replicating how the Western model of development came about. Now, when World War II happened, most economies were reconstructed, and we need to reconstruct our own societies as well. That is the global South and the developing developed countries. Developing underdeveloped countries needed to develop as much as developed countries are already developed. So the dominant paradigm of development was also given us to from the West, and we tried to implicate that same model of development in underdeveloped and developing countries. It was through industrialization, via free market practices, via urbanization. Now, knowledge, skills, and technology came about to be the crux of the dominant paradigm of development. As I already said, that the Western model of development was something which was not exactly existing in the developing or the underdeveloped countries. Therefore, they used a top to down approach, wherein the Western countries gave information, knowledge, and technology from their own self to developing and underdeveloped countries. And the idea was to pass on that knowledge to people who are underdeveloped or developing at that particular moment of time. Therefore, Western values and media played a very vital role in disseminating those thoughts, whether it was of liberalism, whether it was of pluralism, whether it was freedom of speech and expression. And therefore, the capitalism idea came about in developing and underdeveloped countries at that very same time. The mass media here was actually used as a channel, as an instrument for modernization, and mass media and the way it disseminated information came about during the dominant paradigm of development itself. So it was also following a simple linear approach, since it was top to down. That is a certain number of people were giving information to the masses via media. Therefore, theories that developed during this period were bullet theory, hypodermic needle theory. Now, bullet theory and hypodermic needle theory, if I may have to repeat myself, would be that media has a neutralizing effect on the masses, and one person disseminates information to a lot of people via media, and it pierces through them via information and knowledge. Both bullet theory and hypodermic needle theory were in similar context. The information theory by Shannon and Weaver also came about during this time, and Marshall McLuhan's ideas of extension of media, medium is the message, also came about during this time. However, dominant paradigm theory of development, as it was being talked about, was not really effective. Why? Because one, it was simple linear. There was that people, the masses, were not being included in the decision making process. So it was only a handful of people giving out information to the remaining audiences. Therefore, it was also criticized quite a lot in the global south, because of the top to down approach. The difference between Western countries, them being dominant, them being superior, came about to be quite a lot, and the effects of those media was also from a Western viewpoint. Moreover, culture and human experiences of the global South, the underdeveloping countries, developing countries was being neglected to a large extent. And since a handful of people were disseminating information, were giving out knowledge, the elitist vertical process was also being considered as a criticism of the dominant paradigm of development. And these development agencies, which brought about the dominant paradigm of development, was belonging to the West. The second theory that came about after the dominant paradigm of development was the dependency theory. Now, the name might suggest that it was leaning that underdeveloped and developing countries were dependent on the Western countries. However, it is not the same concept. This came about in Latin America, which is also an underdeveloped or developing set of nations, and it played a vital role with regard to bringing about the new world information communication order. Now it emerged because of the dominant paradigm of development, and sort of in reflection to what was being considered as a model of development, which is top to down. So the dependency theory emphasized that the Western media, the Western countries are leaning towards a model of development wherein the developing countries and the underdeveloped countries will have to lean on them, and which is certainly incorrect or wrong. And it also emerged with the neo-Marxism concept, wherein they said that there was too much dependence on the developed countries, which is also worsening the development of the third world countries, because human experiences and the culture of the third world were not being considered when it came about to the dominant paradigm of development. So it was extensively criticizing the development programs from the West, because it was saying that the dominant paradigm of development is increasing the inequality, is increasing the gap between the rich and the poor. The distribution of resources in land was incorrect. There was more discrimination when it came to the dominant paradigm. Therefore, the dependency theory leaned towards bringing about a change and a difference in the development model of the West and the development model of the underdeveloped and the developing countries. Therefore, the reason for emergence of this particular theory was global exploitation by the West, cultural imperialism, wherein the Western countries were showing that they were better than the third world countries. Then the media, which was capitalizing on the entire scenario of the Western media imposing their development model on the third world, and this led towards the development of an alternative paradigm. The alternative paradigm has its origin in the Frankfurt School in the early 1970s. So, as we can see, the dominant paradigm came about right after the World War II, 1945, 1965. Then dependency theory came about in the 1960s and 80s, and the alternative paradigm came about right in the middle of it, wherein the concept of critical cultural trend of mass communication was emerging. Now, here, mass media was heavily criticized because they were extremely commercial, they were immoral, they were monopolistic. Therefore, mass communication was being heavily criticized by the Frankfurt School as well. It was being considered as manipulative and oppressive. This also gave a view of the society to be critical and to think about their own development in the context of their own self, that is localization and not globalization. They also rejected the transmission model of communication, which came about from Shannon and Weaver. Alternative paradigm, since it's situated in the critical cultural trend, it addressed inequality and the sources of opposition in the society. So it was also talking about how capitalism, how mass media and the Western model of development is sort of harming the development model of the third world. And here they all were also opposing how ownership patterns and the content of mass media was affecting the development of the third world. They were also talking about the social cultural experiences and media experiences in togetherness. So the alternative paradigm was actually combining the dominant model of paradigm with the dependency theory, and it was bringing about alternative media channels in this particular context. Therefore, it was also reflecting towards the multiplicity paradigm or the multiplicity model that came about right after this or right during the alternative paradigm. Now, multiplicity paradigm was focusing on the differences between the first world, second world, and third world. In this context, they were talking about how development is different across these three worlds, how the media is channelizing these paradigms, and how the social cultural experiences, the media, the ownership patterns, the political scenario is completely different across these three worlds, and how the development needs to be done through an interdependence model rather than just the first world separately, the second world separately, and the third world separately. During this time, Anderson's imagined communities concept, wherein Anderson says that communities are need not be just be segregated on the basis of geography, but they might go across because of globalization, because of media, and that time also internet was coming about to be. So because of globalization and commercialization and media, how communities are not just segregated by geographical or political boundaries, they go much beyond that. And the three trends that came about from the idea of multiplicity paradigm were that multidimensional development needs to be taken into consideration. Culturalist communications need to be taken into consideration, wherein the concepts of ideology, hegemony, and sort of criticism of the dominant paradigm came about here. This also gave rise to another development communication model for development, which is the participatory model, and which is extensively used in the context of development communication at the moment. Now, the participatory theories and approaches are a cluster of theories and approaches that gave rise to the concept of development communication. It is critical of the dominant paradigm because, dominant paradigm was focusing on a top-down, centralized approach of development, while the participatory theory was much more grassroots in nature. It was emphasizing on how the people should be empowered from within, and they should be given the power to make decisions with the kind of resources that they need to develop, which will lead towards development of the society in a wholesome manner. Therefore, the center of attraction of the participatory theory and approaches was the receiver. Now, it was emphasizing on people's participation in designing as well as implementing the models of development and the policies of development. Therefore, ordinary people were the key agents for change as well as the participants for the development. So, the idea of democratization and participation became primarily important in the participatory theories and approaches, which worked on mutual trust amongst the people who are making and designing those theories and who are implementing those development policies. So trust, honesty, and commitment became incredibly integral to the participatory theories and approaches. The emphasis, as I talked about, was on local communities, localization that is, and strengthening of the democracy via the people became pertinent here. So, as I already talked about how people's participation in implementation and designing of those development policies became important, the government were just facilitators of resources. However, redistribution of those resources became important in the participatory theories and approaches. People's ownership with their stake in content generation, dissemination became important. So the idea of community radio, of alternative channels such as video units, user generated content. Internet also came about during that time, so user generated content and platforms rose about, which gave people voices to speak what they had to, and to raise their voices against oppression, against capitalism, against various evils of the society that they needed to tackle with. And also action oriented research and action oriented media came about during that same time. So these were the three, four broad theories that led to the idea of development communication. And it was sort of linear in nature, wherein the dominant paradigm development to dependency model to multiplicity and alternative paradigm, and that led towards the participatory theories and approaches. This is about the theories of development. Let's move on and talk about development communication. Does anybody has any questions, anything that needs to be clarified until now? Any questions? Okay, so let me resume my presentation. Screen visible? Okay, so let me start with the second unit of this particular block. Now, the second unit essentially talks about development communication. Development communication as a concept, as I talked about, came about after the alternative paradigm, after the multiplicity paradigm, and the participatory theories and communication approaches gave rise to the concept of development communication. Now, what exactly do we understand by development? Can anyone elaborate? No? Okay. So development as a concept is what participatory process of social change is. It can mean advancement via equality, via quality, via freedom, freedom of speech, expression, freedom to do whatever you want to do, and a greater control over the environment. Development is therefore an upward movement of the entire social system, wherein they rise from the grassroots and reach up to a level where they want to reach, whether it's resources, whether it's spiritual well-being, whether it's material well-being, whatever it come may be. Development can be considered liberation, empowerment, and an upliftment of the spiritual and the material well-being. But development can be understood from two parameters again. One is the first, second, and third world. Remember when we talked about first, second, and third world and how it came about during the multiplicity paradigm. Now, the first world are nations from from North America, Western Europe, and Japan, which were aligned with the US. The concept of first, second world came about after the Cold War specifically, wherein USSR actually after World War II and then somewhat established around the Cold War era, when the first world was defined by countries which are aligned with the US, Western Europe, and Japan specifically. They are developed, they're capitalist, and they're industrialized. The second world countries are the countries which were aligned with USSR. They're communist. It can be China, Russia, of course. USSR was Russia and Eastern Europe. They're socialist and they're also industrial. to a great extent. But the difference between First and Second World War was First World War was capitalist, the Second World was communist in nature. Although both of them had good technology, good access to development, they also were industrialized to a great extent. But the third world was contradicting to the first, and the concept of the first and the second world. Third world was rest of the country, wherein most of them were underdeveloped, or they were marked by poor quality of life. They were also newly independent nations after the Second World War, such as India and most of Africa. The world, although is something which is completely different and defined by communities and ethnic groups. They do not have any geopolitical boundaries, but are just indigenous people who are living within some kind of a state or across state boundaries, such as Nagas, Tibetans, Pashtuns. And development can be defined by the north south divide as well. North is North America, whole Europe, and East Asian countries like Japan and South Korea. Again, they're developed in, and they're capitalist, and they're industrialized. They also have high performers in the HDI, that is Development Index. And the South, the global South, are nations from Latin America, Africa, South Asia, which are underdeveloped or developing, and they have poor performers in the HDI again. So these are the two parameters on how development can be divided. First and second world are developed. Third and fourth world war are developing or underdeveloped. Same goes for north and south. North is developed, and south is developing or underdeveloped at the current time. Now, development communication. Development communication, if we are to define it, or if you're supposed to situate it in a box, it can be communicating for development, and it can be communicating the development. So it is a two-way process, wherein you communicate as well as you gain the communication, that development on both parameters. Now, Everett Rogers was considered as the father of development communication. Development communication, according to Everett Rogers, is empowerment of people. It is giving them power, controlling, that is power to generate new possibilities without any kind of domination. Power with, that is giving them power with a lot of people, so collective power specifically, and power from within, which is the spiritual well-being, which inspires them to actually go ahead and get into development. This is what how Everett Rogers defined development communication as to be. So, development communication aims exactly at informing, creating awareness, educating, and enlightening the people so that they can better their everyday life. It also refers to the planned use of strategies and processes of communication aimed at achieving development. The key concepts of development communication. The first is inclusiveness. Why inclusiveness? Because unless one and all are equal and they are coming under one umbrella, we would not be able to really get into the essential definition of development. Therefore, media acts as a tool for bringing everyone together and for socially including everyone without getting the exclusion side of it. It also acts as a collective response system to alert practices of exclusion and violation of human rights. Now, essentially, mass media is not the tool to for collective response system, but it's the alternative media channels that are taking that initiative to bring everyone under the umbrella to bring about inclusive development across all kinds of communities and all kinds of nations. It is also the integration of old and new ideas. Now, communication strategies, they need not be defined in a certain moment of time. When communication came about in the 1970s, 1980s, it had a different definition, it had a different process of working out. But that is essentially different from communication development at the present. So the strategies are integrated from the old and the new. So it's not an entirely new idea that is developed in the current scenario wherein we're just using new media technologies, but we're also using mass media, and we're also using tools from 1970s and 80s to bring about development communication in a wholesome manner. It also focuses on sustainable development. Now, sustainable development essentially does not mean just the ecology, but it means development in a balanced manner, wherein we are thinking about the ecology as well as development. The resources, since they're limited in nature, and practices, although they might go and in towards development which might be hazardous to the ecology. Sustainable development, on the other hand, is focusing on bringing ecology, sustainability of resources, and sustainable practices together. And the fourth idea of development communication is pluralism, wherein diversity of people need to come together and they need to form and implement the policies that they are designing in accordance to each and every one of us. And it is also bringing about different cultures together, but the implementation as well as the designing of those policies need to take the culture and the voices of different people into consideration. So this forms as the base of development communication specifically. When I talk about the main functions of development communication, first, it is to establish a conducive environment. Conducive as in how it needs to take multiple voices into consideration, whether it's assessing their risks, whether it's opportunities, and bringing them both together and minimizing those risks for marginalized people, for people who might not get development as much as another person might. So this is kind of creating a balance between all kinds of people and assessing their risks and opportunities. The second main function of development communication is disseminating information and inducing behavior and social change via disseminating that information. Therefore, when we talk about disseminating information and behavior and social change, dialogue becomes a key concept, wherein it is needed to build trust, to share knowledge, and to ensure mutual understanding. Now, there are two approaches to development communication. One is monologic mode, and the second is a dialogic mode. We'll talk about them in the next slide in a much more nuanced manner. Monological mode, as the name suggests, is one way, wherein dialogic mode is a two-way communication. Now, how are they different? Monologic mode specifically is to inform and to persuade, whereas dialogic mode is to assess and to empower. However, development communication would not be possible if we just take the monologic mode or the dialogic mode. It needs to be brought in together to bring about development via communication. Now, monologic mode specifically is to raise awareness, increase knowledge, and to change attitudes and behavior. Whereas dialogic mode is to assess what kind of problems we might face, to analyze what kind of issues can come up in the future, or what kind of issues are being faced at the current moment, and to change that. That is, it is to assess and to empower. When we talk about monologic mode, as I already said, it's one way, so it's kind of linear in nature. But to balance it out, dialogic mode is a two-way model wherein we create dialogues between people of different communities to implement and to design those policies. In monologic mode, since it's one way, it is linear. Mass media is essential use, whereas in dialogic mode, wide range of tools and methods are used to create dialogue between people across different communities, across different tens of nations, across different countries, boundaries. Nothing matters when it comes to dialogic mode. Therefore, different range of methods and technologies are used to create a dialogic mode. What is the difference between these two communication modes? Now, monologic is essentially based into the modernization theory or the dominant paradigm, which as I said, is not redundant at the current stage. It is still very much in use, wherein dialogic mode is a participatory theory or an approach. Now, the monologic mode is essentially to disseminate information. Dialogic is to ensure proper dialogue. Monologic is just output oriented, wherein the output of what comes about from the top to down approach is taken into consideration. When the dialogic, the process is taken into consideration, when how are the policies being designed, how are they being implemented, and how what kind of monitoring and evaluation is being taken into consideration in the dialogic mode. The basic conception of development communication, the modernization, the monologic approach is that mass media is used in the participatory, professional use of dialogic methods to assess and evaluate stakeholders' environment, what kind of issues they might come up with, and what kind of tools they can actually use to empower themselves comes into the picture here. Main role of communication in a monologic is to decide, design, and use methods. Wherein in the participation, it is to facilitate dialogue, to analyze the situation, and to propose the appropriate strategy for change. Now, the monologic approach is usually used at the implementation stage, wherein objectives have already been decided, and the dialogic is also used during when at the initiation of a project, wherein we need to set the kind of objectives and the kind of approach that we need to take forward. Therefore, communication at the primary stage before taking up either of the approaches is essential when it comes to development communication. Now, I've already talked about development communication to a great extent, the kind of approaches that have been taken forward, the kind of modes that we can take forward, and the what are the functions of development communication. One of the key functions, as I already talked about development communication, is to induce behavior and social change communication. From this particular perspective, social and behavioral change communication came about into the picture of development communication. So it is a strategy of employing development communication, and it is kind of multilinear, or I would say it is non-linear, but essentially covers a lot of strategies in its umbrella. So social and behavior change communication, it uses a lot of communication strategies that are based on behavior science to positively influence knowledge, attitudes, and social norms amongst individuals, institutions, and communities. So there are three tangents to social and behavioral change communication. One is communication, when we understand what kind of communication tools we need to apply. Now, for that, we need to understand the target audience, their needs, their drives, what kind of preferences they have. And this is essential for understanding their behavioral change, what kind of tools may help to bring about a behavioral change. Now, behavioral change is not an easy process. Therefore, the social change also needs to be taken into consideration. Behavioral changes specifically linked to the psychological changes, when social change is a change in the society or the surroundings around them. To understand social and behavioral change communication, it will be essential to understand about the socio-ecological model for change. This became as a base for social and behavioral change communication. Now, the socio-ecological model, or the SEM model, talks about four key elements or four key factors that can bring about change in the society and the behavior of an individual. First is the self. Self is what you are, essentially an individual. Second is the interpersonal section, wherein partners, family, peers, friends come about into the picture. The third stage is the community, wherein the organization, leaders, providers, people around you are constituting the community. And the fourth stage is the environment, wherein policy, legislation, leaders, government, NGOs, politics, economics, religion, technology, everything comes into the picture here. So, according to the socio-ecological model for change, uh, the to imply or to apply SBCC, or social and behavioral change, first the self needs to change, then the interpersonal level will change, then the community will change, and the environment will change. So it's a stepwise process. And how to bring about a change, or how to bring about a change in the self. First is information, wherein you gain knowledge. Second is motivation, how attitudes and beliefs can bring about a change in your own self, and further on into the other levels of change. Third is the ability to act. If you have the efficient necessary skills, if you are self efficient to bring about a change, if you have the access to resources or not. And the fourth element here is are the norms. What kind of norms we have? If we have a gender bias, if we have a difference in terms of social cultural experiences, if we have perceived differences, whether it's in relation to age, gender, class, caste, region, religion, all of that needs to be considered to bring about a change in the self first. Now, these are the three approaches to social and behavioral change. But without combining these three, we would not be able to come across social and behavioral change. The first element I would talk about is behavioral change, which is the third. Um, yes, Kondwe, please go ahead.
Yes, can you just come again on the ecological approach because I think I've missed something there.
Right, okay, I'll go back.
Yeah.
So, the social ecological model for change came about sometime around in the late 1990s. They talked about having four stages of coming about to have a social and behavioral change communication across in an effective and efficient manner. First is the self. Self reflects on the individual, or you, me, an individual specifically. The second stage is the interpersonal stage, wherein partners, friends, peers, family comes into the picture. The third stage is the community, wherein organizations, leaders, providers, our first immediate community comes to the picture. It can also have, say, a second family, third family, which might essentially affect or influence your communication channels. And the fourth channel is the environment, wherein legislation, politics, economics, religion, technology, government, NGO, corporates, everything comes into the picture in the fourth stage. So, if we want to bring about change or social and behavioral change for development, the first and the essential part is to bring about change in the self. There are four factors to bring about a change in the self. First is knowledge, information gaining on what kind of knowledge you have and what kind of knowledge you need to gain to bring about a change in the development. The second factor is motivation. If you have the right attitude to bring about change, to bring about development, if you have the right beliefs to bring about a change in what needs to be done and what needs to what where are you exactly. And the third factor is the ability to act. If you have the necessary skills to bring about development, if you have a necessary knowledge to bring about to act upon what needs to be done, if you're self efficient on bringing about that change, and if you have access to the resources that will help you, the tools that will help you bring about a change in the society. And the fourth factor are the norms. What kind of norms are being perceived by you? Whether you have a gender bias, if you have any social cultural differences in your mindset, if you perceive differences in terms of age, in terms of caste, religion, class, region, um, race, color, creed, so that all of these factors together combine into yourself, and how we need to focus on all of these tangents, all of these dimensions of knowledge, attitude, belief, skills, access, and perceived norms to bring about a change in the self, and then into the interpersonal circle, then into the community circle, and then into the environment sector circle. So that is how SEM works, wherein first change in the self, and then further on the environment is taken into consideration for bring about a change, and that is done via development communication or SBCC specifically. Am I clear? Okay, great. So I was talking about the strategic approaches to social and behavioral change communication. There are three strategic approaches: advocacy, social mobilization, and behavior change communication. While these three are essential in their own self, but we cannot bring about social and behavioral change communication unless we combine all three of them. The first I talk about is behavior change communication. Now, behavioral change communication, you can do so by at the individual level, at the community level, and it that is the what leads towards the social mobilization and the advocacy part of it. Now, behavioral change communication can only be done at the individual and community level. Why? Because unless we bring about a change in our own self and in our immediate community, we would not be able to bring about a change in the environment and in the social part of it, the society of it. So we use certain tools such as mass media and social media, as well as community level activities and interpersonal communication, that is face to face communication, for bringing about changes in knowledge, attitudes, and practices amongst us audiences. Now, not only mass media is used, mass media is certainly used, but we use other tools such as face to face communication to bring about a change, to reflect on what kind of norms we need to come about to inform or to persuade our immediate community, whether it's say whether we are trying to focus on bring talking about climate change. It cannot immediately start from the society at large. It needs to grow from one person to another and the immediate community. And that is how we'll start talking about, say, climate change, whether it's talking about capitalism, the hazards of it, whether it's talking about issues like say sexual reproductive health, whether it's talking about how abortions take place, or what kind of harms it might have, what kind of positives it might have, and issues at large across health, across literacy, across climate, across environment. All all of that starts from the self first and then moves on towards the community. So behavioral change communication becomes at the crux of SBCC, or social behavioral change. The second tangent is social mobilization. Now, social mobilization is actually done at a societal level. Again, it need not go towards the national part of it, but it starts from the community specifically, wherein a partnership and alliances are formed, and it includes bigger communities, or it includes two three communities together to bring about a change and mobilize audiences to talk about issues at hand. It can have ownership, it can also have community mobilization, it can also have coalition building. Now it can go beyond the community and until the national level. And the third strategic approach is advocacy, which is at the highest level of SPCC. So we go on from behavioral change communication to advocacy, from individual to the national level, in order to raise resources as well as bring about change at the community and the societal level. How do we do so? We may talk about political and social commitment together, whether it's combining the practices of our leaders and the social efforts of what we think might be right for the community, for the society, and what how we can combine both of them is what advocacy really does. So these three approaches together can bring about social and behavioral change communication in a wholesome manner. It's a very bookish thing to say that these three together can can take SBCC to a greater height, but it also involves a lot of stages and a lot of efforts from the society, individual, as well as the government, to bring about a change across these three tangents. And to bring about social behavioral change, there's a certain framework. Now, as I already said, social and behavioral change communication has a set pattern. Unless we follow that, we would not be able to come across to monitoring and evaluating what are the issues exactly and how to eradicate those. First is the assessment of the entire scenario at hand. It is to analyze what kind of audiences we have, the target audience at hand, what kind of risks each and every audience or stakeholder might have. So, different community might have a different risk as compared to another community. So, this particular stage assessment will define what kind of risks, opportunities, needs, solutions, and what kind of media channels can be used to eradicate those issues at hand. It also helps us to draw out the objective of the entire scenario. For example, when I talk about research specifically from the SBCC perspective, we might go ahead and say, okay, we need to work on climate change and how it is being communicated in newspapers. But we do not know what to do, how to do, and where to exactly go ahead talk about it. So we'll first identify, analyze, and refine all of these parameters. What will be our audience if we are talking about climate change communication in newspapers? Who will be our audience and stakeholders? What kind of risks and opportunities we might have in order to bring about, say, an action approach, when we need to say that, see, there is problematic communicating the there is a problematic communication of climate change in newspapers. How do we eradicate that for all of these uh, groups of stakeholders? What kind of risks they are facing at the current moment? So for example, a particular tribal community might be facing issues which might be different from an urban community, or it might be different from a rural urban community, and we need to define all of those, and then look at the needs of all of these sections of society, and say that, look, a young person might have a different strategy towards communicating climate change. An older person might have a different strategy. A woman might have a different kind of strategy or a different dimension of climate change. So we need to define all of those, and then come about to the solutions to what kind of communication might help a woman, what kind of communication might help youth, what kind of communication might help an older person. So the same kind of strategies cannot be applied across all of these groups. A youth cannot be communicated via a mass media channel, whereas an older person might prefer a mass media channel to communicate climate change in a more effective manner. For a young person, social media might be more helpful. Climate activism via social media, that is, a woman essentially might not talk about climate change in a wholesome manner, but might talk about how how burning of fossil fuels is influencing her health, her menstrual health, her reproductive health, and we might have to delineate what kind of tools might be helpful for her, specifically in dealing with those issues, and what kind of channels we need to implement to bring about and communicate the issues at hand. After we are done defining the communication channels and the strategies that each and every marginalized group or each and every stakeholder needs to take into consideration, we get into the designing mode. We select first what kind of approaches we need to take forward, then the kind of messages we need to disseminate, then the kind of learning systems that we might have. A woman might have a different learning style as compared to, say, a well-versed, well-educated youth, as compared to an older individual who's not literate. So we need to design what kind of strategy and approaches we need to take. The next stage comes at the implementation stage, when first we will do a pilot testing. Pilot testing will refer to, say, we have developed a small video, a short video for women on climate communication. We'll first test it on a smaller group of women, and we'll decide if it works for them. We'll take a pre-test. We'll check their attitudes and behaviors before communicating that video to them, and after communicating that video to them, and we'll check what kind of differences there is in their attitudes and behaviors when it comes to climate change. If we see there is a vast difference in what you were expecting with your short video, we will have to change about what kind of information we are giving out and the way we are giving out that information in that video. If we see that it is actually effective, we might go ahead with the same tool, with the same workshop intervention, and take it to a mass audience as compared to the pilot study. So pre-testing, then media production, then we train our so if we are researching on a larger scale of audience, we'll have to train people across those communities to disseminate information. For example, one of my friends is actually working on a research on disseminating health information to a tribal community in his state in India. Now, to initiate that, he has developed a short video. He has shown it to a smaller audience. Now the language of that video is being problematic to that audience, who say that then unable to understand the technical jargons, the words, the kind of framing of what they need to say out loud. So they are actually, so that person is going and reproducing that media, the workshop video that he developed, and now he's training others from that same tribal community to communicate that health information in a more effective manner. And then finally, they are leaning towards message dissemination via research. So this stage of implementation goes from pilot testing to the final implementation stage. But before and after pilot testing, we need to have certain parameters where we need to understand what kind of attitudes and behaviors were before that pilot testing, and what kinds of attitudes and behaviors are being induced after the message dissemination, so that we can see the kind of gap that is being built across the framework. So the last stage, as I talked about, is monitoring and evaluation. Now, monitoring and evaluation is again the last stage of your testing, wherein you see what kind of attitudes and behaviors are being changed towards the end of communicating what you need to communicate. So there's certain channels or communication channels for social and behavioral change. First, as I talked about, is mass media. You can use print, radio, TV, cinema. This is usually used when you need to reach to a wider audience in a lesser amount of time. So issues such as HIV/AIDS, such as smoking is injurious to health, mass media is a channel that is usually being used to that, because there are larger groups that we need to cater to, and it's not a very localized message that needs to be delivered. Therefore, mass media is usually used for such issues which are national in context. The second communication channel is a small format community media channel, which are community radios, community bulletins, loudspeakers. Now, these specifically are used when we have a smaller community which is vulnerable to a certain issue. For example, a certain community which is living near the coastal region is about to be hit by a tsunami. You need not use mass media channels to communicate that. You can use small format community media channels to exactly communicate that message to that affected community, and to inform them, persuade them, and to empower them to bring and help themselves in that particular time. So SFC is usually used when it's just a specific community that needs help. The third useful communication channel is interpersonal communication, which is face to face communication. Why we need face to face communication is when there is a loop system of support, feedback, and motivation. In the context of the example I gave, when it came to health information, now health information is usually done by opinion leaders in certain communities. Those opinion leaders, if we disseminate information to them in a face to face manner, it will be more effective for them to communicate that same message to their target audience. So therefore, face to face communication becomes of a sense when there's a support, feedback, and motivation strategy that comes into picture here. So advocacy specifically. Fourth are peer educators, wherein local capacity can initiate training. For peer educators, the issue that needs to be fought should not be in immediate, should not be an immediate need to be solved. It can be issues such as sexual and reproductive health, wherein peer educators will be communicating. First, we'll train the peer educators on what sexual and reproductive health is, what kind of information needs to be disseminated, and then they'll pass on that same message to different communities or different states or different stakeholders in their area. So, peer educators are usually employed when the issue is not very immediate in nature, but it is still a pertinent social issue that needs to be solved. The fifth communication channel is a participatory drama. Now, participatory drama is usually undertaken by individuals who are affected in a particular community. So for example, it can be the issue of gender bias. It it can be an issue of women being harassed in public or in private places, whatever. So these communities, for example, if we talk about women being harassed in public, they can come together, being a community as a whole, and they can dramatize, participate in the drama, whether it's designing what kind of drama they need to bring about, whether it's implementing that drama, where they need to dramatize that, and they sort of bring about their lived realities via that drama. And they also explore realist solutions through participating in that drama, whether it's writing, whether it's acting, whether it's sound, whether it's just bringing about people to watch that participatory drama. So this is also something that is community based, but different from SFC or peer educators, because it's dramatization specifically on issues that can be dramatized. Then there is use of local folk media, wherein music, local art forms, local theaters, puppetry. So sort of again, community-based, localized media channels that can be used to communicate issues, to communicate problems, which might also be psychological in nature, which can also kind of heal, or which can disseminate information to bring about solutions as well. So again, when I talk about issues such as gender bias or women being harassed, local folk media can also be used. Now, IEC materials, or information, education, and communication materials, sort of go hand in hand with mass media, with SFC, with interpersonal communication channels, because these are materials that individuals spread along with. They can be pamphlets, they can be information in the form of brochures, it can be just information in certain formats to raise information, to educate the audience, and to communicate effectively. So all of these channels, they can go all together hand in hand to communicate social and behavioral change communication, and which can be used at the strategy design level. They can also be used together, they can also be used in pairs, they can also just go ahead with just one communication channel for bringing about social behavioral change. It entirely depends upon the issue at hand and the target audience that we're going to achieve, that we're going to actually get our message across. So what kind of communication that we can use to overcome these barriers? I will not go from the social and structural change, but at the individual level, we need to have communication strategies to bring about change at the knowledge level, the skills level, what kind of benefits and values we might have, what kind of norms we perceive, what kind of emotions we perceive. At the family and peer network, we need to have peer influence. So people across, what kind of peers we have, what kind of influence and mindsets they have, what kind of communications our spouses might have, what kind of communications our partners, family might have, and the support that they might provide. So these are some of the barriers that we need to overcome, and we need to communicate effectively on how to overcome those. So again, the strategies of SBCC are usually implemented here to bring about a change at all of these levels again. At the community level, what kind of leadership we have, what kind of access to information we might have, if we have any kind of collective information efficacy that we might want to disseminate at all levels. And finally, at the social and structural level, if we might have the effective resources and the services and the policies and regulation to bring about a change. And what kind of religious and cultural values one might have, and what kind of channels might effectively communicate to overcome those religious and cultural values if it is hindering some kind of social and behavioral change. And the intervention of media and technology becomes important here, because media and technology might not really be helpful at the individual, at the family and peer network, but to bring about a change at the societal level, at the structural level, media and technology is the most effective way to overcome those barriers. So this was about social and behavioral change, wherein we talked about what is exactly SBCC, what kind of models, the SEM model, which becomes as a base for SPCC for development communication, what kind of approaches we might have, what kind of methodology that we might adopt to bring about social and behavioral change, and what kind of communication channels we might adopt at different levels, at different stages of our communication, to disseminate information and to bring about a change in the social and attitudinal and behavioral level. These were the communication channels we might be able to overcome at the four stages in the SEM model. Let us now talk about some of the case studies. Now, in the IGNOU units that you might have seen that there are a lot of Indian examples. So you might not really be able to familiarize or relate with it because, well, you belong to a different community altogether. So I would not be talking about those specific case studies, but I would talk about certain issues in an overall context. So we might have development issues such as literacy and education. We might talk about poverty and hunger. We might talk about healthcare, hygiene, and sanitation. We might talk about unemployment. We can talk about family welfare and population control, gender issues, infrastructure deficiency, rights and social justice, and finally the environment. Now, when we talk about all of these issues at hand, we do not have exactly examples to quote on what kind of strategies have been taken up to say eradicate illiteracy, to bring about education, to bring about a change in the healthcare structure, to help issues of poverty, hunger, unemployment. But we certainly have examples at very basic level across our communities to tackle all of these issues. These are some of the issues that one we can focus on the case studies. You might go ahead and search for case studies on each of these issues if you come across at a more community level basis, for you to understand what kind of issues and what kind of practices are being employed to tackle all of these from the perspective of social and behavioral change. I have two case studies here. One is the implementation kit in Niger, which was to communicate about high risk pregnancies. Now, this particular case study is from USAID. USAID came about with HC3, which is Health Communication Capacity Collaborative Project, which was started in 2014, and it talked about how Niger, it has one of the highest maternal mortality rate in the world and the highest fertility rate, which is completely contradicting nature. When there are about 7 to 9 kids on average per family, and the highest maternal mortality rate. So USAID came about with this particular I kit, which was to strengthen the capacity to implement a state of the art health program, communication program, to disseminate information on what AMA is and what HP pregnancies is, and how one can help. So the tools that they developed was a client brochure. A client brochure was specifically for audiences uh, at a more uh, at a more grassroots level, and who were also a bit conservative in nature. Then there was a counseling and assessment guide for providers, for healthcare providers specifically. Then that iKit also had an assessment guide for community health workers, who again became as health providers for the community at large. Then a poster for these providers, a guide for journalists on how journalists can help AMA and HP pregnancies, and how they can avoid AMN HP pregnancies, and what kind of issues that might come up, and what how to handle. So across healthcare providers, across journalists, across researchers, across individuals. So this kit had tools in different formats. After researching for 5 years, if I'm correct, yes, 5 years. After researching for 5 years, they developed these tools for all of these audiences on the basis of their qualitative and quantitative research, to understand what kind of factors drives AMA and HP pregnancies, and how one can actually help or eradicate these issues of maternal mortality rate. So, a guide for researchers, AMNHP infographics for policy and decision at the government and the legislation level, and a guide for working with community based groups. So, these kind of tools were essentially IEC materials, as I can already look through it: client brochure, assessment guide, assessment guide for community health workers, reminder poster, guide for journalists, guide for researchers, infographics, and a guide for working with community based groups. All of these were essentially helpful in eradicating some form of maternal mortality rate, and it was a success. Although towards the end of the case study they had to bring about certain changes. If you want, I can take you to that. Okay, I'm unable to open the link from here, but yes. So after evaluating this for 5 years, they also came up with certain strategies on how they can implement this further and how they need to actually address the issue by talking to more of older people, older generations who do not understand the issues of AMA and HB pregnancies, and how they need to communicate with more conservative groups on high risk pregnancies, on how to actually help with the fertility of mothers at a later stage of their lives. According to the HC3 and HTSP I kit, women who were getting pregnant at a later point of time were amongst the women affected by this. So how at a family level also this issue can be eradicated, this was also what HC3 and HTSP iKit was helping them about. The second case study is of that of the US. So this this actually was on sexual and reproductive health. This was to help. This was originated in John Hopkins University in the US, and it was implemented in Latin America specifically. Now, the purpose of bringing about an urban adolescent sexual and reproductive health SBCC implementation kit was to provide a selection of essential elements and tools to guide the creation or strengthening of SRH, and to bring about a social and behavioral change for urban adolescents aged 10 to 19. They recognize that adolescents in the age group of 10 to 19 were indulging into unsafe practices related to sexual and reproductive health, and how they need to actually bring about a change and how they need to communicate effectively to the audience. Now, this age group being a bit of vulnerable, because one, they are minors. Second, they're communicating information such as SRH, which in itself is which a touchy topic and a sensitive topic to deal with. So the audience for the kit was SBCC professionals, people who are already indulging into social behavioral change communication, SRH professionals, social, sexual and reproductive health professionals, youth-led organizations, or youth-focused professionals. So, categorically speaking, they are not talking about audiences specifically adolescents in the age group. They were targeting audiences which are communicating that information to young people in the age group of 10 to 19 on sexual and reproductive health. So they had four tools specifically to handle sexual and reproductive health in a sensitive manner. One was the first part was providing background information to use the kit. The second were the seven elements of the program planning and interactive worksheets. Now, the second screenshot talks about the essential elements, the seven elements. First was information about urban adolescents, how they can make sense of urban adolescents and what kind of information they already have. The environment, their audience, and audience profile. So this essentially as a tool and iKit was actually helping them in understanding the profiles of those adolescents in the age group of 10 to 19, and to navigate on the issues of sexual and reproductive health in a sensitive and systematic manner, so that they're able to communicate effectively on the issues of sexual and reproductive health. The third part was strategies to address those implementation strategies, the challenges that they might face, and the kind of tools that they might help and empower young people with regard to sexual and reproductive health information. And the fourth part was basically a get to know basis, wherein the information that they were disseminating, the fourth part was just a check your progress kind of a thing, wherein they were checking what kind of progress they've made with regard to sexual and reproductive health information, and if they're effectively communicating what they need to communicate. So that was about the second case study on sexual and reproductive health, and how they're implementing social and behavioral change across two different cases. One was on pregnancies, AMA and HP pregnancies, high risk pregnancies, and the second was on sexual and reproductive health. These are two examples from different communities specifically. One was Africa based, second is America, so a developed country. But social and behavioral change is working across at different tangents to tackle issues at both these levels, whether it's reproductive health, whether it's high risk pregnancies, and how both of them can be implemented across different countries by adapting or adopting at different levels of the society. So that is about it. Thank you. If you have any questions, please, I'm here to happy to help you out. Please let me know. Any questions, any queries that you need to talk about, whether it's development communication, whether it's the theories of development, whether it's social and behavioral change communication. This is my email ID if you want to take any kind of help or guidance from me with regard to block 2 of median development. Please note it down if you need to, that is.
Okay, please can we have these slides?
Yes, I'll make these slides available, not an issue. Any questions, any queries, any doubts that you might have? I guess there are none. Okay, I'll share the slides with the concerned person, and they'll send the slides to you. I hope median development was informative and helped you in understanding the development theories and development communication, and the different strategies of social and behavioral change communication in an effective manner. Please let me know if you need any help via my email ID. Thank you. I hope this was helpful. Your next session will, I think, be scheduled on the 1st of April. That'll be communicated to you, right?
Yes,
Gone away?
because
Any?
we had the schedule. We had a schedule of that. So
Right.
the next one should be next, yes, next week on April.
Okay, great, great. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much. I'll end the session here.